Coming up on a Mailbag Friday edition of the Locked On Nets podcast, we take a look at what the return from injury for Dariq Whitehead could mean for the Brooklyn Nets, whether or not fans should care about what former Nets players do in their future NBA careers, and when unfortunate circumstances take place off the court for an NBA player, should any team, Nets included, stand to benefit? We break it all down coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. I am Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day and remind you that we are free on all those great platforms. And then if you haven't done so already, you should be join subtext.com/LockedOnNets so that you can get all the conversations that we can't jam into the podcast, jam into our YouTube discussions, and even over on X, Twitter, whatever you want to refer to it as. Be sure to take advantage of the 14-day free trial at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNets. And let you know today's episode is, of course, brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, Mailbag. We've got a pretty wide-ranging collection of questions that we wanted to get into, some very net-centric, and then a little bit broader around the NBA as we think about, first and foremost, the rookie, Dariq Whitehead, and maybe an opportunity for him to get back on the court.
Yeah, little bits of news coming out for Whitehead over the course of the last week where, he's been at training camp or he's been at the facility. He's getting shots up. It's a good sign. We still don't know exactly what the timeline for his return is. After all, he had the foot stuff that came out of the draft. We already knew that. The speculation was that was why he underperformed at Duke, right? Was just struggling with foot issues, and he ultimately gets drafted. But we even spoke about this before the draft. We were actually feeling decent about this as a draft pick for the Nets before they took him. We talked about this extensively because the Nets doctor had been the one performing the surgery, and we felt like they were as close as they could be on the medicals. And Whitehead offers this really interesting upside case that we know the Nets sort of shot for this year, which I think, we can get into here a little bit, but but they have a long runway with him. And I think that the upside could be as good as anyone in this draft. And it's going to be a really interesting situation going into the season. Right. I mean, what are your expectations for him going into the season? I think I know what mine are, but I'm just curious if we're on the same page.
I've set them incredibly low, not based on who he is as a player or what we think he can be long-term, but just from the health standpoint. I think it's why when Nets took him, the understanding was we're drafting you and thinking about it just like Noah Clowney for very different reasons. Health-wise, take the entire year if needed to get healthy. But what does become interesting is then when you hear, well, he's getting shots up. And that means, as we know, we think about the Ben Simmons situation, very little relative to being ready to play in NBA games. But the idea that maybe a quarter of the way through this season, maybe ahead of the trade deadline, Dariq Whitehead could get on the court and start to show what could be possible for him. It makes it interesting to think about how that can influence the rotation for the Nets and then decisions that they make, I think, ahead of that deadline midway through the season.
Yeah, I think they're actually in a really, what they did in this offseason, I think they're really in a good spot with these two rookies specifically, right? We knew they took rookies that were probably a long way off. They're both very young, Whitehead and Clowney both. And they kind of populated the roster with like big swing, or let's call them medium swing guys, right? That like they can maybe end up just reclaiming some value on either in the trade market or whatever, not having to put any pressure on these guys to come in and perform early, right? The expectations are super low. And I think that's a good thing for both these things. We saw from Clowney during Summer League that he was really, really raw, right? That's going to be, maybe a long time coming, but that's fine, right? We think the ceiling's pretty high for him. And then with Whitehead, we haven't seen him at all, right? Because he's still in the recovery process. He'll probably end up playing Summer League next year, which would be pretty cool. So I actually don't even know if we'll see him this year. Like I I think it might be just like a Long Island Nets kind of development thing, and long recovery time, stuff like that. Like the Nets we know the Nets with the medicals and stuff. They've always been. I mean,
super upfront and transparent.
I don't even want to call it conservative because like that seems conservative would seem like they were like wildly, just throwing caution to the wind. I mean, these guys, right. I mean, these guys have been as rough as it gets when it comes to just like trying to figure out what's going on or timelines or all this other stuff. And it's almost always taken longer. So I don't know. Like we might not see him at all. That's fine. I think. I hope we do, but yeah, I think that the Nets are in an interesting spot with him. He would be a guy for sure. Like if he was playing at Long Island that you'd want to tune in for. Like, I don't know I don't know how often we're tuning into Long Island Nets games, but this would be a situation where if he was playing, be like, hey, let's take a look because I think it could be meaningful. Clowney too, to some degree.
Well, and just as a reminder, he comes into the league at 6'7", 220 as he's going to be developing. He is 19 years old, and I think sometimes we split them, or at least I have. Clowney is the young player that needs time to develop, but because of the injury and because of where his NBA draft stock would have been if not for that, I keep thinking about Dariq Whitehead in a different way, but it's a good reminder. He only played in 28 games for Duke. 7 games started, right? Like the sample size is very small, very promising, but he does still fall into that developmental track category. Last thing that I'll ask you on it around his development. And let's say that he's healthy enough at some point this year to get on the court for the Long Island Nets. You stop short of saying bring him up to the NBA level at some point this year if it looks like it's viable, because I guess maybe it's splitting that difference of if we have an opportunity to make a trade, we talked about at ad nauseum this offseason, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, you'd like to think that you have something even beyond a Jalen Williams to bring into that fold. But you would not pressure Dariq Whitehead to come to the NBA level and start to show something, even if it's going incredibly well at the Long Island level.
Oh man, if it was going really well, then yeah, for sure. I just more meant I wouldn't be concerned if they didn't. Like that's
Okay.
more just to clarify my point before. I'm all for if it looks ready to go, there's literally no reason to waste it. Like you want these guys on NBA court sooner than later. But I'm more saying that if we didn't see it, or if it was sort of like slow because of the injury stuff, that's also just totally fine. It's just totally fine. The Nets are in that kind of position now. They got a lot of guys that you want to see rotation minutes from to see what they have. Whitehead's age and everything else just means he can go to the back of the line, not from a talent standpoint, but just from a developmental standpoint. Just take a year. It's totally cool. So yeah, that's all I meant. If he's ready, he's ready. Let's see it. But I really doubt that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so interesting, just to watch how these players are going to develop. And if we get into camp ahead of the season next month, whatever it is, whether it's just he's getting up shots for Dariq Whitehead, whether, hey, a little one-on-one, right? Anything we get on him is just going to start to set a little bit of expectations for how excited we can be, whether it's watching him at the Long Island level or potentially coming up with Brooklyn at any point over the course of the season. So always a good note when we know there is a bit of a wait and see timeline on both of the first round draft picks for the Brooklyn Nets. Coming up here in a second, let's think about players that have left Brooklyn, including one of the fan favorites in David Duke Jr. How should fans feel when seeing what players do after leaving Brooklyn? We dive in on that coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. NFL season is rip-raring and going right now, heading into week 2 here over on FanDuel. And FanDuel's got incredible offers. It's America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, folks. Right now, over on FanDuel, new customers can bet $5, and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets back. That's guaranteed. That's all you got to do. You go in there, you bet $5 to any one of the many offerings they have, money lines, player props. It's all there. Over-unders. It's all there on FanDuel. You bet those $5, you're going to get $200 back. Plus, all customers who bet those same $5 are going to get $100 off NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You're getting the bets. You're getting the games. That's everything you can want on a Sunday. Now it's the best time to join FanDuel. App's easy to use. You can bet on everything. Like I said, from spreads to player props and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season with an offer you're not going to want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Okay, so as we continue our conversation, Mailbag Friday edition, thoughts about Dariq Whitehead and hopefully seeing him get on the court here and just give the fan base something to be excited about as we think forward for the Nets. But then we think about the past, and I will contextualize this beyond. I mentioned David Duke Jr., a guy that need not be considered a valuable lost commodity for the Brooklyn Nets, but he did sign officially the 10-day contract with the Philadelphia 76ers, and it did just get me thinking about when you review back, and people did this around the superstar trades, right? Oh, well, Jared Allen, you could have kept him. Karis LeVert, you could have kept him. You made all these decisions. You didn't get anything for it. And then you turn around and you see that Jared Allen is a very good player, but I don't know if he was going to be the absolute needle mover for Brooklyn. Karis LeVert struggled with injuries and otherwise, and maybe it doesn't feel as bad. Do you think that fans should care? Let's just start there, because I'll contextualize it to the Nets' current roster in a second. But should Nets fans care when you sometimes see players go on to have different or better or that next level of their career?
Well, yeah. Well, to clarify, I mean, those guys went out in the Harden trade, so it wasn't like they went out for nothing, right? Like, I mean,
right? Yeah, 100%. It wasn't just like walk away in free agency.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Duke situation is a little different. And so I just to clarify that, like, those guys were used as value commodities, and I think, like, with LeVert, I think we've seen, like, okay, that they probably sold pretty high in LeVert. So I think that I think from that standpoint, you don't feel bad about it. It's always a little tough to see players go out the door and perform other places. I'm always happy for these guys. I root for all these dudes. I just want them all to make it. I really actually sometimes struggle with saying guys shouldn't make the team or things like that, because there's a livelihood piece to it that to me is always a little weird, right? It's like, oh yeah, they shouldn't make the team. I'm like, I don't know, this guy's life in the balance and like life-changing money and stuff like that. I don't know if I want to be I'm not the arbiter, but it feels weird even saying it. No, I mean, with David Duke, I hope he catches on. It was the same thing with Kessler Edwards, right? It was like, okay, well, this is weird. They're kind of just dumping him as a salary dump to just get off to get him out the door so they don't have to cut the guy later. I will say in general, the Nets have in the past have had way more wins on this side of the ledger than losses. Like, guys that they brought in have outperformed what other teams basically let them go, and the guys they let go really never caught on anywhere else. Think about guys like Musa or Curix, guys like this, right? That Nets fans dreamt on for a while, and then they let them go and they're gone. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I think just in general, I always want these dudes to perform well. I wish there was more slots in the NBA for them to all catch on. I can understand why they did not bring David Duke Jr. in here. And I'm not so concerned about him making some kind of like heavy rotation minutes leap this year either.
Sure. And it's the idea. Well, in his case particular, all of a sudden he's on the court, in a key matchup against the Brooklyn Nets this season. It makes any play at all, right? Gets his hands in on a pass. You're going to go, oh, like, you'll have that moment. I think the fans will have that moment no matter who it is. But the other interesting thing here, before I tie it into the current roster, is, Spencer Dinwiddie goes out and he goes to Dallas, and he has a great short run with Dallas, with Luka. And at the time, it's, we didn't want to pay him the big contract, but he gets paid and he ends up in Dallas ultimately after.
Well, hold on real quick. He got paid by Washington.
He got paid by Washington. Yeah. Gets paid by Washington, ends up there and ultimately has a nice run in Dallas after the stop in Washington. And again, at the time, nobody wanted to overpay for Spencer Dinwiddie. But then when he's playing elsewhere, you look at him and go, boy, he really, he's been having a good run there. As soon as he gets back on the team, though, like, I think this is just a natural process for fans. You don't want to give up the guy. You maybe don't want to pay him, but you love to keep him. Then you see how he performs. You want him back. Then he gets here and you go, well, you're not living up to our standards now, right? So to your point about livelihood and expectations and everything else, it always falls victim to, is the team doing well? Are you're shooting too much for what I would prefer? So like, you end up pigeonholing guys you want them at the right price point, in the right role, playing at the absolute best version of themselves when they're on your team, or not looking so good elsewhere. And I think D'Angelo Russell is another good example of this as well, right? He's there with Dinwiddie for the run with Brooklyn. He moves on, looks good a little bit, but never to the point where fans are, oh no, he's more exposing some of the weaknesses of his game. And that's why you're okay and you feel great about it. Obviously goes out in what ends up being the Kevin Durant trade.
Well, if you remember too, I mean, a lot of the talking points around not re-signing Dinwiddie was that like Sy was cheap. If you remember, it was that I was like, oh, they're not doing,
has lasted even through the superstar era, somehow still lives on.
Right. They're not doing everything they can. They should have re-signed him. This is Sy being cheap. And then, fast forward a few years later, or 2 years later, I guess, and the Dinwiddie conversation has changed, mostly because his role changed, right? Like when he was when he was more of a role player, it was like, okay, then it was, or sort of a really good role player. That was a good spot for him. When he's the lead ball creator, maybe it gets a little funky. You said the same thing with D'Angelo Russell, right? It's like it gets a little funky with him too. It's like, well, now he's a max guy. I'm like, well, that really doesn't make sense, right? Well, he's not anymore.
I thought I loved him, but it turns out I there's a price expectancy around how much
we talk about this all the time, right? We just always say this, that it's like expectation over money. It's all the you can, your expectation when you get paid, the expectations just go so much higher that your game doesn't have to change at all. It's just the money changed, and now all of a sudden the narrative around you changed. But I think in general, the Nets, I mean, with Dinwiddie, with all these guys, I think they've done mostly pretty well on this stuff. I think the resume that they have for what guys do elsewhere and what they've gotten for them has been pretty good over the years. So it's hard to get too crazy about it.
Now, here's the interesting one, I think, Nets-centric. This isn't about Royce O'Neal or Dorian Finney-Smith, veteran guys that you want to get value because you know that they're going to continue to get older and their value is going to diminish. Cam Thomas is the on-roster guy that I think this might be the first one in recent memory, or the highest profile one, that let's say he doesn't crack the rotation for whatever reasons, performance or otherwise. It could be that he just doesn't put it together, even when you see the samples. And the Nets move on from him by the deadline. You're going to see this guy, no matter what his career is, you're going to see him put up buckets wherever he ends up, especially if it's a bad team that needs scoring. That, I think, there will be ire from the Nets fan base towards the Brooklyn Nets organization if Cam Thomas leaves midseason at the deadline and he averages anywhere above 12 or 13 points is probably going to be more than enough to get people pretty irate. And I guarantee you it would actually be closer to 20 than 10.
Oh yeah, he'll be the canary in the coal mine for like net sanity around this exact time. This is a great call by you. Yeah. This is the exact guy. This is the exact guy that would drive people he drives everyone nuts now, and he's on the team. So it's already a huge problem among just different narrative people around like the Cam Thomas thing. If he went off to another team and was good, oh my God, you would literally never hear the end of it. And probably maybe rightfully so. I mean, like this would be one of those, this does represent what could be a huge miss if it were to go different somewhere else. The season will be fascinating with him. But we have a million storylines that we're going to get into. We'll go in the next couple of weeks. We'll go through like our most intriguing storylines for the season. Yeah. And we have a lot of them because there are a lot. This one is right near the top for the Nets, which is hilarious for a guy that sometimes couldn't even get off the bench, but that's the whole narrative. It's like this is really interesting with him.
So coming up here in a second, I'll give a little follow-up note, which makes the Cam Thomas situation even more exacerbated potentially for Brooklyn. And then we'll turn our attention to an unfortunate off-court situation for the Houston Rockets and Kevin Porter Jr., and whether or not teams across the league, including the Brooklyn Nets, should be willing to engage in a process that benefits them in the long term, even surrounding a player with some problems.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Jace Medical. Look, these days, really with anything in life, the worst thing you can be is unprepared. And then when it comes to medical stuff, forget about it. You definitely don't want to be unprepared when it comes to medical stuff, when it comes to emergency use. Jace Medical, they've figured this out. They provide 5 life-saving antibiotics that they'll just get sent right to your door. It's doctor created, doctor recommended. There's physicians on staff that are going to work with you, and you're going to get what you need when you need it. We've been through this before with my own family. You get the round of strep going through the house. The last thing you want to be able to do is just go to the doctors, trying to get appointments, get into the pharmacy. All this stuff can just pile up. Jace Case solves this for you. You're not going to be unprepared, and they have the things that you're going to need. Right now with Jace Case, you can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics, plus an additional $20 off if you use the promo code Locked On at checkout for Jace Medical. That's Jace Medical, JASE Medical.com. Folks, listen to me. Don't be unprepared. Go doctor recommended, doctor created. These guys have figured it out. JaceMedical.com. Use the promo code Locked On.
Okay, so as we continue our Mailbag Friday, talking about everything from what could be for Brooklyn Nets players, whether they're here or elsewhere, and then also a league-wide narrative here in just a moment with the NBA. Reminder that if you're not over on joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets, you won't have an opportunity to have your thoughts about Dariq Whitehead, talk directly to Doug and myself, and have us get back to you. Yeah, we have more than just 30 minutes a day to dedicate to discussing the Brooklyn Nets. Have a conversation like you're in your favorite group chat with all your buddies talking all things Brooklyn Nets. 14-day free trial on joinsubtext.com/lockedonnets. So the last just quick note on the Cam Thomas situation too is that remember also that if he were to go somewhere else, that 2 years from now, when maybe Mikal Bridges has been traded, maybe Cameron Johnson isn't here, like when the Nets maybe are in a full rebuild mode, that'll be when his performances elsewhere is exactly what every Nets fan will be looking at, because it will be a bad team getting potentially big minutes and big points from Cam Thomas. And that's exactly where the Nets will be. A bad team that needs big minutes from a guy that can get a lot of points, regardless of whether or not it leads to wins or losses. So this dude will forever. No one has been dragged more, I think, relatively speaking, maybe unfairly, just in the spectrum of like what he could be. You don't know. We still don't even know what Cam Thomas is, yet nothing has been at a higher level. That being the case, we kick off the final segment here with an unfortunate situation involving Kevin Porter Jr. and the Houston Rockets. I'm not going to go too far into the details beyond the fact that he was arrested in New York City following a 911 call on assault charges. There's already been other information that's come out from the victim side of this as well, so I don't want to go too deep into something that is probably going to continue to evolve. Bottom line being, something non-basketball related occurred, and Kevin Porter Jr. is in a very serious set of circumstances for himself. And on the heels of that, the Houston Rockets immediately came out and said, hey, we're shopping him. We're looking to go ahead and get this guy off our roster. And it just made me think about a fan question that asked if the Nets should be involved in this for draft capital reasons. But also, where should the NBA be on situations like this, where something that has real serious ramifications away from basketball can end up benefiting teams, other teams, any aspect of it? It seems like a very weird situation for the NBA and sports in general.
Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible situation. It's an assault charges. It's on file here with the district attorney in Manhattan. It's really, really bad. I mean, and the Rockets, it came out when we were recording this on Thursday. It came out on Wednesday evening that they were trying to trade him, that they were going to, like you said, attach draft capital to get off the contract because they want to win now. Like they're like, hey, he was going to be part of the rotation, and we are willing to give assets in order to get off the money. He is due $15 million a year. His contract is weird. It's because like he's got 2 non-guaranteed years after this one, then a team option for 26, 27. I'm going to go ahead and say that team's not going to be picking that up. So there's it looks like it's essentially an expiring. Who knows what the guarantees are in the next 2 years, but I don't think it's much. And this is a guy who, just as a note, when he came over from Cleveland, there were issues with. There was issues coming to Cleveland. Got off the contract got off of him early because they were having issues with him there, and there's been bibs and bobs of stuff around him with the locker room. I mean, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said by national reporters for a while now around Kevin Porter Jr. Regardless, I think your question is, should teams enter this space of like capitalizing on an unfortunate situation? I think it's really tricky. The cold answer is yes, right? As that, well, this is the situation. These are the logistics. The law is going to end up dealing with him in a legal way. So that's just going to be whatever it is. And from the business of basketball, if a team is looking to help you improve your team by getting off their problem, I don't think that there's any moral ramifications with that. The Nets are in an interesting situation, specifically here with Houston. Maybe we do a whole podcast about this at some point, but I don't know. I don't know if I gave a wishy-washy answer there, but I think you're gonna see him moved. I think you're gonna see him traded, because at first I was like, no way, what are you, crazy? But I didn't realize the contract was non-guaranteed for the 2 years. I think that you're gonna see him probably get moved here, and then immediately waived and dumped, right? Like, and I think that's
and just on the partially guaranteed next year, guaranteed money is $1 million, 24-25 for Kevin Porter Jr. So not necessarily, a figure that would scare anybody away. No, and I think you're right. I mean, you see this a lot, especially in the NFL.
Yeah.
NFL has had a lot of situations, high profile, where it's something comes out and it's immediate because contracts are structured different in the NFL. They can cut ties with a player instantly. And then there's a moratorium on how long does a team have to wait before you can pick somebody up. And, you want to think that it's legitimate, but they put out the right PR statements around it. That player rehabilitates themselves in terms of the eyes of the community, and they make their way back onto the court. You mentioned that Kevin Porter Jr. is seemed to have had something following him, never to this level, but concerns around him all the way back to Cleveland. When it comes to the Brooklyn Nets, and maybe any team, and to your point, a full episode on what's happened with Houston as a team and a franchise and how that impacts the Nets and the capital they gave away to them. Certainly a full episode coming from that. But if the Nets or any team said, listen, you don't like the stink on this guy, great. You want to dump him off your roster? Fine. We don't want anything to do with him, but we'll take him. And with a clear public statement, he's not a part of our franchise, not a part of our organization, but it's just a prudent move for us to regain capital. I think you're still going to see public backlash, any team that does take him on, no matter how you frame it. But that will probably come and go. And on the back end, the Brooklyn Nets could stand to get more draft capital and maybe even move off of a contract that, whether in the short or long term, they prefer to get away from anyway, right? So it's like you said, it feels a little bit cold, but this is a part of the business of the NBA and of sports, and you have to be calculated about making decisions that help improve your team.
I mean, specifically, they could recoup their own draft capital. That's the reason. That's the reason that it's like actually probably the most. I'm going to put the word interesting here. It's horrific. I'm strictly from a basketball standpoint. It's interesting because this is a situation where the Nets specifically have their own draft capital tied up in Houston, right? And we've talked at length around the problems that's created for their own sort of what their sort of short-term plans, right? They can't really tank because they don't have their own picks. And so, and Houston owns those exact picks. The ability to control their own destiny a little bit more here is immensely valuable to the Nets. It's really the whole reason I think you're seeing some of the moves that they've done, or even like some of the flirtations with the ideas around Damian Lillard and stuff in the past, is because not owning their picks means they can't bottom out. By the way, in a time where it'd be great to bottom out. So many of these teams are trying, like so many teams in the NBA right now, i.e. Houston, right? We're going to see the Magic probably take a jump here. Pacers clearly want to get better. I mean, there's very few teams right now that are in the happy to stink category, except for like the Wizards. I mean, even the Hornets are going to try, right? They bring back Bridges and Washington, and like they're going to try. You're going to see the Pistons probably try a little bit to start. A lot of these teams, the Spurs have Wembanyama. I'm sorry to just give a whole list here. The point is, there's a lot of teams going into the season this year that are going to try, at least to start. They're going to be giving it a good go here. The Nets are uniquely positioned to stink if they wanted to, and if they own their own draft capital, it would make that so much easier. They just can't. They can't because they don't own the picks. Houston has them. So I don't know if Houston sent these back. Maybe it's a whole podcast episode. If Houston sent them back with this, you'd have to pick the phone up.
Oh, yeah, and I think that the NBA floor feels like it's higher across the league in terms of teams and being competitive coming in this year, right? Which is probably another discussion we can have here as we move forward. And incidentally, I'll just point out, because it will be a full episode for us, but in terms of no protections, the 2024 first-round pick that has been sent to Houston, and then no protections on the 2026 first-round pick that's also been sent to Houston. But even the 2025 first-rounder, this is where it gets really funky here before we get out the door. OKC has the rights to swap the first round pick with Houston, 1 through 10 protected, or LA Clippers 25 first round pick. And then Houston can turn around and decide if they want to swap its pick or the OKC pick for the Brooklyn Nets pick. There's this big hierarchy board that goes on here. And that's what I think might be the most fascinating, is what's the threshold of what Houston is willing to do to unload Kevin Porter Jr. The Nets may have to, quote, settle for one of these slightly later 2025 picks, but still get some level of value back for themselves and some level of control, really, as we always talk about, control over your own assets. It'll be interesting to see if getting back their first round pick, which is greatly devalued relative to what the Nets are doing and what Houston is currently doing, it all swarms around, and on the other side of it could influence how the Nets approach this year specifically. So hey, next episode, next week, tune in, because we're going to have a very interesting conversation, I think, about what could happen here going forward, regardless of Kevin Porter Jr. and the Houston Rockets.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated, everyone tuning in over on YouTube. The numbers continue to grow over there, so make sure you hit subscribe. Also, join us over on Subtext. Join subtext.com/lockedonnets. You're going to get basically everything that's going through Adam and I's head throughout the day around the Nets. And that's a wonderful, that's a dangerous but wonderful place to be. So it's a free 14-day trial. It's only a few cents a day. It's just this is the way things are going here with the new media, and we love Subtext. It's really, really great. Everyone that's been on there is loving what's going on there too. So join subtext.com/lockedonnets.
A person often meets his destiny on the road he looked to avoid. Jean de La Fontaine.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, 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 basketball.